have the water. We have the water there for you. And then, okay. And we're back and be professional. Gotta be professional. Yeah.
It's a family group, you know.
The what?
It's a family group.
Yeah,
You know?
I know.
We're all friends.
I know. There's a lot of my family out there.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Lifelong friends. Yeah, so does my hair look all right? 'Cause I don't want to. Yeah. How's that? Okay, that's good.
Christina's going to introduce you, so
Well, you know what? I need a Kleenex.
I got that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that's great. Marta's going to get some Kleenexes. I think I've started to get spring allergies. Yeah. Thank you.
Couple up here for you just in case.
Okay. Marty, so how long? So is an hour okay, or how long? 50 minutes?
50 minutes. Because I expect questions.
Okay, so there are a couple of parts. Anyhow, I want you to listen carefully to this and see if you really like this picture. It's a weaving of a whole lot of other things.
So believe me, I'm going to listen.
Yeah. And there is a lot I need to know about Harriet Beecher Stowe and coming to Ripley because of those big that problem.
Yep, it's fine. Okay.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Friends of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, we respectfully acknowledge that the ground on which we stand are traditional Miami and Shawnee lands. We extend our esteem and gratitude to the indigenous people who call this place home. Welcome to the Harriet Beecher Stowe House here in our partner space, the First Unitarian Church. My name is Christina Hartlieb, and I'm the Executive Director. We're excited to see you here today and to present this program, Trust and Teamwork on the Underground Railroad, with author Han Hagedorn. We'd like to thank our lecture series sponsors, Alan Bernard, who is not here because he's in France right now, but also the Friends of Harriet Beecher Stowe House Board. And I know we have some board members here, so if you're a board member, would you please stand up? Thank you to our board members. We also have a lot of our wonderful volunteers here, so if you're a volunteer at the Friends of Harriet Beecher Stowe House, go ahead and stand up too. Thank you. Excellent. About the speaker, Anne Hagedorn is a former staff writer for the Wall Street Journal and an award-winning author of 6 narrative nonfiction books. She was a history major at Denison University and holds master's degrees from the University of Michigan and Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, plus an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Denison. She's recently been elected to the Society of American Historians in recognition of the narrative power and scholarly distinction of her historical work. Her quest as a nonfiction writer is to use the literary techniques of storytelling to deliver deeply researched topics of significance to the general reader, especially to reveal remarkable people and events that fell into an abyss of obscurity. After living in New York City for 2 decades, she now writes her books in a small town on the Ohio River. We know what town that is, Ripley, which she discovered while researching her 3rd book, Beyond the River, The Untold Story of the Heroes of the Underground Railroad. Let's all welcome author Anne Hagedorn.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, of course. Truly honored, more than the usual statement at the beginning of a lecture, in part because of the abolitionist history among dynamic Unitarian ministers. And I thank you, Tim Krause, for taking me to a new level of understanding about that antebellum history. And of course, thank you, Marty Lintz, where is she now, and the Harriet Beecher Stowe House Board for inviting me here to speak. As many of you know, the focus of my third book, Beyond the River, is the anti-slavery network known now very often as the Underground Railroad. Beyond the River is, as you just heard, a narrative nonfiction book that brings to life the courage and achievements of abolitionists, especially in Ohio. And as some reviewers noted, the book expands the definition of those rather daring individuals to include more free blacks and women and youth than realized perhaps before. Since its publication more than 20 years ago, yes, 23 years to be exact, hard to believe, I have given numerous lectures nationwide based on that book's themes, always with the hope of enlightening people about the importance of Ohio during the passionate, dangerous, and immensely challenging crusade to end slavery in this nation. But today, for this audience, I really don't need to be a walking PR for the state of Ohio. I realize that. And it's hugely interesting history. What I can do is share some observations about the Underground Railroad, perhaps smash a myth or two, tell a few stories about the anti-slavery advocates in the borderland, meaning, as most of you I'm sure know, the Ohio River Valley, and weave in one or two new details from my recent research for my next book, which will focus on abolitionist women. My quest for that narrative is really to build a ladder, so to speak, that will lead a group of female abolitionists out of the abyss of obscurity and thus offer readers a new path of awareness. For now, I'm calling today's lecture Trust and Teamwork on the Underground Railroad. So let's begin with two misconceptions, which we could say may have reached myth-like levels among the general public. First, that the Underground Railroad is all about tunnels and secret rooms in cellars and barns, hidden doorways, and more. As an author on the road for Beyond the River for the book tour, audience members would often ask, "Did you see any tunnels?" And one day while in New York City, I had lunch with a former colleague who was curious about why I had written a book about the Underground Railroad instead of a topic linked to one of the stories I had covered as a staff writer at the Wall Street Journal. I told him about my goals to spread the word about the significance of Ohio in the anti-slavery cause, and how Ohio in the antebellum years was brimming with anti-slavery societies as well as abolitionist newspapers. I mentioned Cincinnati and Oberlin and shared a few stories about the Beyond the River research. But alas, he did ask, "Did you see any of the tunnels?" My answer was and has always been, the Underground Railroad is about far more than tunnels and hidden rooms. It's about truly, truly remarkable people. Whether you're talking about the courage of slaves to even attempt an escape, or the bravery of the free blacks and whites who risked their livelihoods and even their lives to participate in the covert networks. Yes, the houses, the cellars, the tunnels, etc., are very alluring. We all know that, and excellent ways to awaken people to that antebellum history. By the way, there are now, I may be wrong about this, somebody can correct me on this, but I think there are now 101 houses in the state of Ohio that have been confirmed by the U.S. Department of Interior, specifically the National Park Service, as Underground Railroad safe houses. 101. Sound right? Okay. But alas, it's the people. The astute, often brilliant, always brave people who must be the focus. We must find out who they are, who they were, what they did exactly, and what motivated them, how they did it, what they were up against, and what we can learn from them, especially how they could take such risks. That's what counts the most, it would seem. That's what I call the moral brilliance of the Underground Railroad. And clearly there was plenty of moral brilliance in the state of Ohio, plus, by the way, all through the borderland, including Kentucky. And that brings us to misconception number 2, that everyone on the Kentucky side of the river was pro-slavery, and everyone on this side, all the way to Canada, was an anti-slavery advocate wearing a halo. Simply not true. Consider this quote from an 1838 issue of The Philanthropist, which, as many of you know, was an anti-slavery weekly newspaper, first published in New Richmond, Ohio, and then by April 1836, out of Cincinnati by James Birney. And most of you know who James Birney was, presidential candidate twice for the Liberty Party, one of the forerunners of the start of the Republican Party. The 1838 quote went like this, quote, "When was Ohio free? Never. It is a mere race ground between the slave states and Canada, between the land of violence and oppression and the land of liberty. And all its highways and byways are so many courses entered and scoured and run over by slaveholders and their hirelings." So let's look at a few facts. In 1787, remember this will be on your multiple choice test, so you better be taking notes. I don't see any notebooks out there. Anyhow, okay. So let's look at a few facts. In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance banned human servitude in the territory north of the Ohio River. Word would spread, of course, that beyond the river was a place of freedom. And gradually, the river would lure slavery's two cultures, one of resistance and one of oppression, which often collided on the river, like sheets of ice grinding one against the other. Those conflicting cultures grew with intensity on both sides of the river, and with time, as more freedom seekers escaped across it, their flight paths, so to speak, became more and more widely known, thus stirring the emergence of a cottage industry of slave catchers. Soon there were risk takers on both shores for and against slavery. Those who were part of the Underground Railroad and or devout abolitionists versus those who nailed the wanted posters on trees and buildings, advertising hefty rewards for capturing the anti-slavery men and women who were, when needed, helping slaves to escape. The resistors versus the oppressors. The only true freedom might be to reach Canada, but alas, recent research has revealed a lot about slave catchers turning up in Windsor and Chatham, two of the known destinations in Canada. Despite the Northwest Ordinance and Ohio's Constitution, which banned slavery, there were the Black Laws, passed by the state of Ohio in 1807, which included bold restrictions for free blacks, such as prohibiting blacks from testifying against white citizens in court. Clearly, the state's image of being the land of the free was a bit of an illusion. To be sure, nothing had outlawed racial prejudice, which flourished and only intensified as more successful freedom seekers headed north to Canada. And so it was that the women and men assisting the slaves who dared to reach the river and then to cross it personified sheer fortitude. Or as one of my former students once said, they were the definition of the word guts. So these were seemingly ordinary people who dared to achieve extraordinary things. But as I wrote that sentence, I decided you could also say they were extraordinary people who just appeared to be ordinary, rather covertly. So, yes, indeed, delving deeply into the world of the underground networks reveals more than architectural intrigue, for the networks were filled with smart strategists and team players on both sides of the river. For example, let's look at Ripley, Ohio. How many of you have heard of Ripley, Ohio? Yeah, right. Maybe some of you live there. Yeah. Okay, wonderful place. It was a hub for main players in the underground movement. Their plans of action were often quite bright. For example, the properties along certain alleys that run perpendicular to the river, straight from the river to the hills behind the town, were owned by members of the local network. That was a very smart move. Other details in Ripley that assisted runaway slaves actually have to focus on geography, such as the creeks that surround the town. Slave catchers' dogs would obviously lose the scent of escaping slaves in the water. It was also the fact that in the 19th century, the Ohio River at Ripley was rather shallow and narrow, and there were and are many hills almost immediately beyond the river. Now let's get to the people. Ripley was known among pro-slavery advocates, slave owners, and slave catchers as the abolitionist hellhole. Among the individuals who inspired that brand name were the following. First, we must look at the Presbyterian minister, Reverend John Rankin. How many of you know about John Rankin? Yeah, good. Yeah. Well, hopefully I can reveal a couple things you may not know. But Ripley was known among pro-slavery advocates as the abolitionist hellhole, in part because of the network that he created. But let's get a little deeper into Reverend John Rankin. His work as an abolitionist was indeed crucial to the movement nationwide. At an anti-slavery convention in the 1850s, famed abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison of Boston referred to Reverend Rankin as his quote-unquote anti-slavery father, whose abolitionist work was the reason he, quote, entered the anti-slavery conflict, unquote. Later, when Garrison gave a copy of his autobiography to Rankin, he inscribed it like this, quote, Reverend John Rankin, with the profound regards and loving veneration of his anti-slavery disciple and humble co-worker in the cause of emancipation, unquote. Important to note is the fact that more than 200 years ago from today, Reverend Rankin wrote a series of rather ardent anti-slavery letters to his brother, Thomas, in Virginia, after receiving a letter from Thomas with the latest news, including the fact that he had purchased at least one slave. Rankin was, I think, furious, and he responded with 13 letters, published as a series in the local paper, which was called The Castigator, and produced by Rankin's neighbor, David Ammon. In one letter, Rankin described slavery as, quote, a never-failing fountain of the grossest immorality and one of the deepest sources of human misery. It hangs like a mantle of night over our republic and shrouds its rising glories, unquote. In another of his letters, he wrote, quote, at the basis of slavery is racial prejudice, but at the basis of that is the love of gain, which is, quote, the polluted fountain whence issue all the dreadful evils that pervade our world. It gives energy to the tyrant's sword. It drenches the earth with blood and binds whole nations in chains, unquote. And in the last of the letters, this one published on February 22nd, 1825, he wrote, Even after people who have been long enslaved are emancipated, it will require them to pass through several generations in order to regain their original strength and to give the world a fair exhibition of the great powers they truly possess. Ammon, is it Ammon or Ammon? Ammon soon published the letters in book form. Thus, Rankin's words and wisdom from both the newspaper and the book shot through the Ohio River Valley with spark-like intensity. Soon, Rankin's brother traveled to Ripley with his slaves and freed them. In 1830, a New Jersey publisher printed the letters in a new book that would result in many printings and be widely dispersed, even to England. The second edition found its way to William Lloyd Garrison, who then serialized the letters in 1832 in his recently launched anti-slavery newspaper entitled Liberator. In the 1838 edition of the Book of Letters, which is something I just very recently read, this is the 5th edition, Rankin wrote a preface that closed like this, quote, "Let all friends of justice do what they can in their several circles and according to their various stations, capacities, and opportunities. And all their little streams of exertion will, in the process of time, flow together and constitute a mighty river that shall sweep away the yoke of oppression and purge our nation from the abominations of slavery," unquote. And while writing this lecture, I reread parts of my own book to refresh my memory, of course, and I ran across a quote I had somehow forgotten, and the people here with the Harry Beecher Stowe House probably know this quite well. It was from Henry Ward Beecher, one of Lyman Beecher's sons, of course, who many of you know. Beecher was asked, who abolished slavery? And his answer was, Reverend John Rankin and his sons did it, unquote. That is in William Burney's book, James G. Burney and His Times, page 168 to be exact. Yeah, okay. I don't see the notebooks out there. Yeah, yeah, okay. So it was that Rankin's words and his passion reached many people, as did the actions and words of others in his local network. Let's look at a few. First, John Parker, who had been a former slave in Mobile, Alabama, and yet after arriving in Ripley in 1849, he would venture back into slave territory to help organize escapes. Parker was also a brilliant inventor of agricultural tools and machinery, such as a portable tobacco press. We have some Parker experts sitting here in the front row, so I hope this is all correct. Yeah, okay, yeah, true experts. They run the Parker House in Ripley, which is marvelous, of course. Actually, he had 3 U.S. patents, and he ran a successful foundry where he manufactured engines and reapers. His story is truly amazing. And I must note here the book title, His Promised Land, which brings Parker to the general reader. There was also the remarkable Thomas McKeag, who owned a successful pork packing enterprise that depended in part on trade with the South, and that obviously forced him to be immensely secretive, considering the fact that he gave a portion, possibly a large portion of his earnings to the anti-slavery movement, especially contributing to the big expenses of the underground movement. 2 houses away from the McKeags lived a family of cabinet makers, the Collins family, who specialized in furniture and coffins. By some accounts, they had designed coffins that had space at the bottom for someone to hide. One person recently told me there were also wagons with false bottoms that they built. Next, we must note Dr. Alexander Campbell, of course, who was a merchant, physician, an ardent abolitionist, and one of the first 2 U.S. senators from Ohio. Among others, there was the tavern owner in Sardinia, Reverend John Bennington Mahan, whose own abduction by a slaveholder, plus the trial that followed, literally made history in 1838 and 1839. Long story. I read it in the book Beyond the River. It will be on the multiple choice test. Anyhow. And also in Sardinia, there was the highly respected country doctor, Dr. Isaac Beck, with a very clandestine commitment to the Underground Network. Equally active in Ripley's double life were the women. Jean Rankin, known as a stalwart member of the network and often managing one of the major houses while her husband, Reverend Rankin, was on the road lecturing. Together, by the way, they raised 13 of their own children. And in an extended family, at least 6 more, according to the 1840 census. That's a lot. Next comes Catherine McCaig, who insisted on sheltering fugitive slaves during the day as well as at night in the McCaig's home on Front Street, only a few feet from the river's edge. And she had ties, as I've learned recently, to a few abolitionist women on the Kentucky side. She also, I am fairly certain, knew Harriet Beecher Stowe. There is one documented meeting at the McCaig house that Harriet Beecher Stowe attended, as did Catherine McCaig. I'm trying to prove exactly what the focus of that was. There was also Polly Jackson, a free black woman who was known for boldly combating slave catchers, sometimes by throwing pans of boiled water at them. And then, of course, there were the visitors, as I just mentioned, such as Harriet Beecher Stowe. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, by the way, knew John Rankin in part because at least one of his sons attended Lane Seminary in Cincinnati in 1838, 1839, and I think also 1840. Clearly, for it all to work, there had to be trust and teamwork. And do think about trust for a moment. Lies about both races were rampant. Put yourself in the shoes of each, the slave escaping and the network participant. And think about entrusting your life to a stranger who may or may not, in your mind and in reality, be worthy of trust. With time, trust became more and more of an issue. By the mid to late 1830s, there was a burgeoning industry of con artists, perhaps as common as today's online scammers. The trick was they would tell slaves seeking freedom that they were part of the underground movement, thus appearing to be helpful. And then at some point in the arranged escape, they would shackle and return the slaves to their owners, of course, to collect a reward. Near Ripley, just over the county line, nearby Ohio County, there was, in fact, a man who was in the habit of searching local papers on the Kentucky side, as well as in Ohio, for slave owners' notices of cash rewards for runaways, whom he would find and then deceive. With the proceeds from his betrayals, he had been able to buy a house and at least 100 acres of land in Adams County. Eventually, he was caught in action thanks to a man in Kentucky who apparently had figured out the scam and who worked with another man on the Ohio side to expose and to catch the con artist by tricking him in the midst of his own chicanery. Distinctly, it was a war before the war, as there were villains and heroes throughout the Ohio River Valley, in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and in Kentucky. The Kentucky ties to the Underground Railroad were, in fact, rather vast. For example, there was the much-beloved resident of Augusta, Kentucky, who was arrested in September 1852 for assisting the slave of Blackstone H. Rankins. Dr. Perkins, as he was called, was a free black 76-year-old who made his living baking cakes and breads. At the same time, he helped runaway slaves, apparently as often as he could. After his trial in 1853, he was sentenced to 3 years in the Kentucky State Penitentiary. Soon after, he entered the prison residence of Augusta, continued a strong campaign to urge the Kentucky governor to grant executive clemency for Perkins because of his age. Sadly, the governor rejected the petition. 8 months later, Perkins died in the penitentiary. No time today to include the many stories. I do want to mention a few. I want to include Delia Webster. How many know about Delia Webster? There's a wonderful book by Randolph Runyon that tells her story. She was the first woman imprisoned in Kentucky for assisting runaway slaves. I'll give you a few details, so you'll go read that book. So in September 1844, Delia, she was a graduate of Ohio's Oberlin College, took a break from her teaching responsibilities at the Lexington Female Academy in Lexington, Kentucky, and accompanied Calvin Fairbank, a Methodist preacher, also from Oberlin, on a Saturday drive in the country. Long story short, by the end of their trip, they had taken Freedom Seekers 3, I believe. You've probably heard their names, Lewis Hayden and his wife and son, across the river to southern Ohio. But after Webster and Fairbank returned to Kentucky, they were caught, arrested, and eventually sentenced to the Kentucky State Penitentiary. She was pardoned after 2 months, and then in 1854, she bought a farm in Kentucky along the river, I think across from Indiana. Boston abolitionists helped to fund it, as I recall, and she used it as an Underground Railroad station. So if you want to read more, find Randolph Runyon's book. Recently, I have also learned that 2 Shaker communities in Kentucky were active in the underground movement. They owned thousands of acres, which they used as safe grounds, of course, to assist slaves on the run. To be sure, Kentucky was hardly a state of just pro-slavery anti-abolitionists. They were the members of the Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist churches in Kentucky, many being strongholds of anti-slavery sentiment, some boldly denying membership to slaveholders. In Louisville, the first Unitarian church, established in the 1830s, was an abolitionist hub. And one of its members actually was the one who launched the anti-slavery newspaper called The Examiner. I think that was sometime in the late 1840s. For now, let's look at the Concord Presbyterian Church in Carlisle, Kentucky, which was where, by the way, it's about 16 miles north of Paris, Kentucky, maybe 35 miles from the Ohio River, which is where Reverend Rankin preached for 4 years before moving to Ripley. And note this, as early as 1807, the congregation of that church, plus members of 12 other churches in the state of Kentucky, established the Kentucky Abolition Society, 1807, which was one of the first anti-slavery societies in the nation. Its constitution, written in 1808, called for an end to slavery and even asked for anti-slavery sermons and speeches in Kentucky churches. Thus, when Rankin arrived there in 1817, he was allowed to expound on the evils of slavery from the pulpit as loudly as he wished. Plus, he met people in Kentucky who helped him find places where he could work and somehow avoid the state law that prohibited teaching slaves to read. Preaching in favor of immediate emancipation, which is where Rankin bonded with William Lloyd Garrison. Rankin once wrote that he and his colleagues in the Kentucky Abolition Society promoted the concept that, quote, if the slave has a right to freedom at all, he has it right now, unquote. In his 4 years in Kentucky, Reverend Rankin gained followers who never abandoned him, even after he had moved beyond the river to Ripley. Months after Rankin's arrival to Ripley, which was on January 1st, 1822, a carpenter from Carlisle, Kentucky, who owed Rankin money, came to Ripley to build Rankin a house as his payment. It turned out to be what would now be called a triplex. When the builder returned to Kentucky, he began to inform people about how the ardent abolitionist John Rankin now lived on the Ohio side of the river in what would be known as the house with the 3 front doors. That was in 1823, after which the trust and teamwork on both sides of the river would begin to vastly expand. There was always more to say on this topic, largely because we continue to discover more about exactly what happened during those antebellum years. I always say we only know 40 or 50% of the truth about that period. So we have to keep digging. And we have to keep breaking through the barriers of myths, misconceptions, and lies. Recently, I've learned, for example, about the crucial roles of the female abolitionists. So many of them fell through the cracks of history, despite the fact that William Lloyd Garrison, in the year, I think 1831 or 1832, referred to the women as the backbone of the anti-slavery movement. And I've been running into details lately about the clergy who were not in favor of the Underground Railroad because they thought that helping slaves escape was tantamount to stealing slave owners' property. At the same time, some abolitionists had little respect for the clergy who would not stand by immediate emancipation as the only solution. Anyone who didn't believe in that was complicit to the system of slavery, which explains some of the, we don't need to go in that detail today, but some of the schisms that occurred in the 1840s. What has, schisms within the abolitionist movement and churches. What has been quite interesting also is to learn about the many anti-abolitionists in Cincinnati who were making money from trade with the South and did not want to cripple their so-called business partners by standing up against slavery. The more research I do, 2 of the women for this group came from Cincinnati, and the more research I do about what happened here, the more amazed I am about the history of Cincinnati. What, you know, yeah, really an amazing place. Anyhow, but as I was saying, there were these anti-abolitionists who did not want to cripple their so-called business partners by standing up against slavery. I call it the look the other way syndrome. There are so many striking stories to uncover, as I've said, stories that reveal the challenges of the teamwork and the courage of the trust. As I said earlier, these were ordinary people dedicated to extraordinary quests, and my new way of describing them is they were citizens of conscience. Thus, the next time you are sitting on a train, plane, subway, or a bus, or out to dinner with friends, and someone brings up the topic of the Underground Railroad and wants to talk about tunnels, cellars, and secret annexes, you can remind them that that's very interesting, but at the heart of it all were the men and women who showed exactly what trust and teamwork can accomplish, and who could be found on both sides of the river. For now, in preparing this lecture, as I said earlier, I reread parts of my own book. I normally don't do lectures on other books while I'm writing one, but thank goodness the research I'm doing now is in the antebellum America, and I actually enjoyed reading my own book. Oh dear. Yeah, as an aside, I did see 2 changes I would like to have made, but at any rate, My agent always says, don't read your own books because you'll see things that you'd like to change, but you can't anymore. So that's true with a 23-year-old book. So as an aside, I have to add, which I often do in lectures, that I had a wonderful editor years ago at the Wall Street Journal who used to tell staff writers, never fall in love with your own writing. And there's wisdom in that caveat because he was completely on it, and there were other editors at the WSJ who said the same thing, because humility does nurture excellence. Also, I must say that I am a writer who is somewhat uneasy about the now required skill of all writers to hugely promote their books. Hi, I'm Anne. This is a lecture about the history of Post-its. No. But at any rate, however, I will share with you a few favorite paragraphs from Beyond the River. This is what authors are supposed to do at these lectures, read from their books. So I will obey the rules and read you a couple, and one that is very relevant to what we are here for, Harriet Beecher Stowe House. So this is the beginning of chapter 14. Waves break on either shore. And I'll read you just a couple paragraphs. And then I have two more, including my very favorite one, which is the closing paragraph of the book. But anyhow, so here we go. Are you ready? To tolerate the humble author who likes these paragraphs. Sorry. Okay, no. Okay. On a blustery night in late February 1838, somewhere across the river from Ripley, the ice was breaking under the weight of an animal's body. Or was it the body of a human? The man standing on the banks of the Ohio side, near the mouth of Red Oak Creek, wasn't exactly sure what was causing the sounds he heard. His gun at his side, his ears primed to every discernible sound, his body wrapped in several coats to brace against the chill of the river winds. Chauncey Shaw had roamed these banks nearly every night since the river froze on February 22nd, waiting, hoping, and listening for the sounds he was now hearing, the telltale sounds of the struggle of a slave escaping across the river. Slave catchers like Shaw, by the way, his family lived in the house between the McCaig house and the Collins, the cabinet makers that I told you about. The house between them was owned by the Shaws. Slave catchers like Shaw knew that when the river froze, the temptation for slaves to cross the icy road to freedom was sometimes too great to resist. Like the buzzards crisscrossing the sky above the river, the manhunters scouted the banks at night, watching the spots where skiffs had landed runaway slaves in the past and waiting. Skilled in the treachery of slave catching, Shaw was confident that patience would be rewarded, up to $500 for a fugitive slave captured on the Ohio side. But on this night, the ice had begun to thaw. He knew the odds were slim that his waiting would earn him any reward. Quote, all the boys in town had been down on the slow ice that very afternoon. They knew the ice was rotten with air holes and cracks extending almost across the river, unquote. John Rankin Jr. wrote later in his journal about that night. What slave would be desperate enough to try to cross on a night like this? Still, the cracking and splashing echoed back and forth against the snow-crusted hills of both shores, and the sounds grew louder. Then came the baying of the hounds, the voices of men in pursuit, the desperate crying out of a woman. This was it, Shaw knew, the long-awaited catch. His pace quickened to nearly a run as he moved along the bank, tracking the sounds in an effort to target the exact place the slave might land. Crossing the river from the other shore was a slave woman who belonged to a farmer in a few miles south of Dover, Kentucky, on the river, just 5 or so miles from Ripley. She had fled upon learning that a slave dealer had been meeting with her master about the sale of his slaves, including her 2-year-old child. From that moment, freedom seemed as necessary as drawing breath. There was no going back. The beginning of chapter 14. Okay. So we could read more, but let's go to the other two. I did not put my little stopwatch up here, so I don't know how much time I have left at the podium. So chapter 15, which is entitled Mercy Enough. No, that's not the right one. Sorry. You can read that one, though, if you want, yeah. Oh, chapter 16, The Trap. Okay. The summer of 1838 was hotter than usual in the towns on the Ripley line, especially inland from the river. On weekends, families flocked to the shores of the river, where temperatures were a few degrees cooler. Children crowded the sandbar, splashing and screaming as they escaped from the wretched air into the lukewarm water. Ladies conversed over the fluttering of their fans in parlors darkened by shades and drapes pulled tightly closed to shut out the sun. Days were longer than nights, though little was accomplished, since the pace of life was so slow that even the box turtles moving through gardens and across roads seemed to move faster than most people. The horsemen who came over from Kentucky seemed all the more conspicuous that summer as they frantically ran their horses through the quiet, sluggish town into the hills, where they gathered posses of like-minded men and hunted humans as if they were deer. Okay. And so I think I'll add a little paragraph here because this reminds me of what it was like living in Ripley in February when the river froze for a day. Apparently the biggest freeze since 1977. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, so this is chapter 30, the quickening flow, just the first paragraph. I sent this to friends across the country who said, how are things going there this winter? So I just sent them this paragraph. Said, it's cold and the river's freezing. Yeah, but anyhow. Early one February morning in 1856, a medley of moaning and cracking serenaded the people who lived on Front Street. During the night, Ripley's network of creeks had deposited immense quantities of ice in the river, and the flows were now pushing against each other as if in a race downriver to beat the inevitable lockup of a deep freeze. At the same time, temperatures had plummeted. By daybreak, the sheets of floating ice were congealing, and what would be the deepest and longest freeze of the decade had commenced. Okay. So then, lastly, I will read you my favorite paragraph because it sort of says so much. It's really the last paragraph of the book. Okay. One day in the summer of 1892, just after sunset, Dr. Isaac Beck heard that rapping at the door that was once a common sound in his household. Standing on Beck's porch was a gray-haired black man who said he was traveling through Ohio to solicit funds for the benefit of a freedmen's college near Memphis. He was a college professor, and he was a former fugitive slave. As he was coming through Brown County, he decided that he must take the time out from his work to find the people who had helped him escape many years before. Most of them, he learned, had already passed away. This paragraph always gets to me. Whew, I'm not sure why, but maybe when you hear it, you'll know why. There's a Kleenex box somewhere around here if you get teary-eyed. Anyhow, As he was coming through Brown County, he decided that he must take the time out from his work to find the people who had helped him escape many years before. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Most of them, he learned, had already passed away. He remembered that Dr. Beck was one of the people who had carried food to him while he was hiding in a field outside of Sardinia. It had been 50 years, he said, but he could still recall the meal. He told Beck he had gone all the way to Canada and then later, some years after the war, had returned to Tennessee to raise his family. Beck was touched that the man would seek him out. But as the man was about to leave, he realized that all through the conversation, which was a long one, he had never asked the man his name, nor had the man offered it. "Sir, what is your name?" he asked as he shook the man's hand at the door and bid him farewell. The man smiled and said, "My name is Rankin." After the man who took me in that first night here still gets to me 23 years later. So I just think it's so amazing, and it's all completely factual because it was in a letter that was actually at the bottom of a box, I think, that was donated to the Ripley Library, and our lovely, wonderful national treasure librarian and I went through those boxes, and we found that on oilskin paper at the bottom and it was a remarkable account of that experience by Isaac Beck's, one of Isaac Beck's children, I think, wrote it. So anyhow, I just think that's very beautiful, and so that's it. That's all. Yeah, thank you very much. We will take questions now if we still have time, and thank you very much. Yeah, read all these wonderful books. His Promised Land, the Randolph Runyon book, and did I show you this book? Yeah, sorry, okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes for questions, so if you have a question, raise your hand, and Marty and I will come around and hand you the microphone. I'm gonna go. So keep raising your hands so that Marty can start the next one, or get the next one ready.
Hi. Would you please briefly describe the process that you went through for the research for that book and the types of things that you found that might be a little bit different from what you might have expected?
Actually, I'm going to have to tell you to read the source notes essay and the source notes of Beyond the River, because in the source notes essay, which Simon Schuster requests that we do a source notes essay and then thorough source notes, of course. And so in that, it shows all of the details and everything from the court records. I spent a lot of time going through court records in Frankfurt, especially the trial of John Bennington Mahan, which is utterly fascinating, and diaries. John Rankin's sons wrote three of them: Samuel, John Rankin Jr., and Adam Lowry Rankin. Oh, I forgot to read you that paragraph. But anyhow, there's a wonderful chapter about Adam Lowry Rankin that's sort of a father-son story, because it's how he suddenly started to understand what his father was doing, and then ended up dedicating his life to the same cause. But anyhow, those three of the sons left fabulous journals, long journals, perfectly well-written, good cadence. Yeah, really well-written, and very helpful. So the journals, letters, many letters from archives all over the place. They're all listed here. That Ripley Library and the wonderful librarian who may be here today. Is she here today? No. Okay. I call her a national treasure, in all of my source notes, and she's asked me not to because she doesn't like the attention. So, but she is really absolutely fabulous, and she helped a lot. And then everybody in the town, brought me information that was very useful. Church research, property records. Property records are hugely important, and the church records are invaluable. And I'm sure the church records here reveal a great deal about what happened in the abolitionist movement in Cincinnati. And so, weather. Whenever I teach writing, I always tell students, find out what the weather was for such and such event. Because think about how weather affects us all, right? And so if you were riding on a stagecoach or you were riding on horseback and the weather was bad or you were trying to cross a river, then you'd want to know what the weather was, and, no cell phones then. So, so I always do, and that's very hard, the weather research. I'm in the process of doing that right now for an event that occurred in New York in 1837. And it's not easy to find weather, but you got to find the weather. So lots of letters. I really would have to peek at my source notes, but read those source notes and it'll tell you. But, bless those sons of John Rankin with the wonderful journals. So at any rate, and Harry Beecher Stowe, and there is a woman who's now doing research on the Eliza story, et cetera, and so we need to help her, and hopefully it's because of the weather and because of John Rankin Jr.'s description of things that I was able to put two and two together and realize that woman I was reading you about was probably the basis for Harriet Beecher Stowe's Eliza, because that happened while John Rankin had a very close relationship with the Beechers and was spending a lot of time at Lane Seminary. So at any rate, so does that help you at all? Yeah. Church records are invaluable. Yeah. Hi. Oh. And I can't remember, I think it was when I gave a lecture in in Kentucky, maybe a year and a half ago, and there were experts on Shaker history, and one of them came up to the signing desk and said, 2 or 3 Shaker communities in Kentucky were helping hide runaway slaves. I have no idea. No, I've never explored it. Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe closer to around Louisville? Yeah. But there must be, at the Shaker villages, there must be, experts on the history. Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for this very interesting lecture. You had mentioned early on the proliferation of anti-slavery societies in the Cincinnati area, and I was wondering if you could speak to the role that those played after emancipation, as well as the role that some of the figures in your text played following emancipation.
Oh, I'm not hearing that. Let's see.
Oh.
So,
Oh, after emancipation, very interesting. Yeah, well, some of them, like the American Anti-Slavery Society, which began in 1833, that one I don't think shut its doors until 1871 or something. I think some of them, I can tell you there were 1,300 anti-slavery societies in this country in 1837. I just looked that up, 200 of which were female anti-slavery societies. But, and Ohio, the 3 states that had the most anti-slavery societies were first Massachusetts, then New York, then Ohio. Ohio had a lot. This place was high action with the abolitionist movement. But I can't really answer your question about after emancipation. Maybe after the 13th, yeah, probably after, I don't know, we'd have to have a discussion about the emancipation, what it did and what it didn't do. Because I think a lot of anti-slavery societies were still functional for several years after the war and definitely after emancipation. So, and probably, definitely in the borderland, yeah, in Kentucky, yeah. But I think it's fascinating that Kentucky Abolition Society started in 1807. Very impressive, yeah. Wow. Well, I can answer that very quickly, and it's a 6-letter word, family. And I grew up in a family that told family stories, family history, Ohio history. I used to visit relatives in Franklin, Ohio. My relatives founded Franklin, Ohio, and I heard constantly stories about Ohio history growing up. And then, when I did grow up, I left Ohio. Lived in New York City. My mother used to take me to the airport, and she'd say, "You'll be back someday." And I'd go, "Ohio." You know, and then I came back. And why did I come back? Because of my fascination with the history and because of the strength of roots. So I do believe. But so I suppose the seeds were planted there. But also at Denison, I was a history major. I had the most wonderful professors at Denison. And history was just, I think we had to take 34 credit hours or something to be a major. I took, I think, 58 credit hours in history. I just loved it, you know. And so I've always loved it. And I had always planned to just get a PhD in history and teach it the rest of my life. But then other things sort of got in the way, and I decided after becoming a professional librarian, then again, I was on the library faculty at University of Kansas, and there was a wonderful history department. And Bill Tuttle, William Tuttle, who's written fabulous books, he's been a friend forever, and he was always, you know, very enthusiastic about the importance of history. And so I just kept it there. And then when I started to be a journalist, then another influence, went to work at NYU on the library faculty. And the president of New York University at that point was John Bradamus, who had done his PhD on the Spanish Civil War. And so President Bradamus used to do lectures on his true love, which was history. So, you know, it was always there. And so then when I became a journalist, I always wanted to know the background of everything. And, you know, so before I would write a front page story, I'd always want to know the history of this person or the history of this, that, and the other. And So then when I started writing books, it was just a combination of being a research librarian and then being a journalist and then having the passion for history. Because I just think we can't, how can we plan the future if we don't understand the history? And so consequently, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Eric, do we have any questions from the online community?
Yeah.
No? Okay. All right. Do we have time for maybe one more question if anybody has? We had 2 hands up. All right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have loved this book.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you. In reading it, I have felt viscerally that I am seeing repeating patterns in social behavior and conscience from this particular area to the present day. Some of those are easily articulated, and some of them are feelings and generalities, but I would love to know your assessment, having done all of this research, so you've lived this life in this book.
Right.
And how does that speak to us now?
Well, actually, I think we should probably have, a seminar on that topic. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about that, but I think maybe the fact that what popped out when I was writing this was the term citizens of conscience. And so, people who believed in something, and what I'm learning about the women in this period of time is that they not only had to stand up against, they were fighting against slavery partly out of the power of empathy. And the more they learned about it, then the more dedicated they got. But they were not only going up against the anti-abolitionists, they were going up against, no offense to you men in the audience, they were going up against also men who did not want them involved in the movement. So the courage that it took to stand up for something that they firmly believed in over and over and over, is quite admirable. And I think we can all learn from that. I think if you want to really study a decade that might have some parallels to now, by the way, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. That's what I think. And so that's what one of my editors used to always say. But the 1850s, very much after the Fugitive Slave Law was passed in 1850. So, yeah. Well, we just must all learn from the past. We must learn what's smart to do and what's not smart to do, things like that. But anyhow, but we could have, we'll set up a seminar here maybe next winter. Yeah.
Okay, I saw too many hands. So
Yeah.
Yes. I think this is on. Is it on? Okay. I've always been puzzled that it seems to me that the abolitionists who worked on the Underground Railroad would not be a very secret. Like they would be well known to many people. And how were they not just totally persecuted and were they punished in some way when they were discovered?
Oh, yes. You should study the life of Laura Haviland. How many of you know about Laura Haviland? Yeah. And what she went up against and the threats and the reward for capturing her, et cetera, et cetera. No, they all, that's what we have to hugely respect is how they continued from, just think about that. Think about Kentucky in that 1807 abolition society, and then going forward until the emancipation, well, it would actually be going forward till the 13th Amendment and sticking with it. That's what we need to study, need to know about. But so your question is, how did they do that, or?
Especially the Rankins, they were highly built.
Right.
They took so many people.
Right, well, and that brings to mind the fact that we don't know everything, you know. We only have, like, the fact that John Bennington Mahan was trapped by a slave owner into believing that he was helping a slave escape, and actually they were trying to catch him in the action and abduct him and arrest him. And so, you know, there were fears and worries probably every single day. Especially for the Rankins with all those children, for all the families and all their children. But they knew it was right. They knew that it was wrong that human bondage was wrong. And so whether they were following their religious beliefs, or they were following a heart and soul, they knew it was wrong, and so they stuck with it. But they had a lot of barriers. And that 1850s decade is fascinating because of what happened with the fugitive slave law in 1850. So, you know, you could be walking on the streets of Boston and you could get arrested for suspicions of helping a slave escape from South Carolina or something, you know. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And but there are many wonderful books coming out about this, opening up. There's one that's going to be out soon called Freeborn by Dan Daly that is really fabulous. It will really get to you and open up more. It's a real eye-opener in terms of that period of time. And so, you know, we just have to keep digging, and then we'll understand, and we'll be able to answer your question. Yeah, yeah. I don't think that's a very good answer, but I'm not sure how to answer it, except that when you read the diaries of people, or you read a book like Freeborn or Beyond the River or His Promised Land, there are just so many books out there that can kind of, in a way, answer your question just through the facts and the action of the people. But, you know, it's rather shocking how strong they all were, and that's what we have to respect. Yeah.
Well, thank you to Anne Hagedorn. Let's give her another round of applause.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you all for joining today. The Harriet Beecher Stowe House has lots of great programming scheduled for this spring, including the Voices for Truth discussion series on April 8th, where we're going to talk about the poetry of Gwendolyn Brooks. Our Semicolon Club book discussion series on April 26th will feature The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. Our next Deaf Day with ASL interpreters is Saturday, April 18th. We also have walking tours scheduled, African American History Along the Riverfront on April 11th and May 16th, Abolitionists and African Americans in Walnut Hills on April 25th and May 30th, and we have open mic nights on the third Thursdays of the month, and we're hosting a Mindful May Tea Experience on May 3rd. I know you're not going to remember all of those, so check our website, stowehousecincy.org, for more information and ticketing. And we also have some refreshments out in the lobby, so stick around and continue to chat a little bit. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.